This is Modern Gaming Culture. This series will attempt to highlight the phenomenon of PC, console, and mobile gaming and bring to light all of its phenomenal aspects. Let's take a dive together into the world of modern gaming and take apart its structure. Now, here's your host, Rotimi Osagi. Alright, this is Modern Gaming Culture. This is episode 15, Modern Gaming Culture. This episode, I'm gonna do a few things. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to um, sort of tease a series I want to do on this show. Sort of, kind of show kind of what it would look like, basically. So you know, kind of just introduce this, sort of more, instructional style as opposed to a more, radio style, right? Um, so basically, what I want to do is I want to do another profile series, um, and I'm gonna do it, with like two windows. Basically, have like, you know, um, the webcam window, and then basically have like the instructional window, um, and probably do something with kind of this sort of imagery, um, so that it's not too distracting, right, from the instruction. So I'll kind of give an idea of what that would look like. So this would be the overlay. Then um, you'd have whatever I'm showing kind of in that window there, and yeah, basically I'll be doing a instruction style presentation um, with this format, basically. So I just wanted to sort of tease that. Um, this episode, I um, want to sort of bring things down to earth a little bit, um, because I think the material has been very heavy, right? And so um, in order to sort of you know um, bring the show a little more down to earth, make it a lot more palatable, want to um, I want to you know kind of discuss this whole format, particularly this production format, right? And sort of introduce it as, almost like a um, meta of production format, right? Because largely what you find with, you know, um, podcast, has really turned into, a pejorative, right, for internet radio. Um, and, you know, um, now you have this sort of phrase boring podcast that's really been popping up, right? Um, you just find, very overproduced, just basically just like recycled TV production formats, right? Over like pretty much like very vapid and you know um shallow material, right? Um, and it's basically just dressed up, right? Um, and it's basically been set as basically your standard you know um setup for a podcast, right, or internet radio show, right? Some people rent out studios to do these podcasts, etc., right? um and it's something where you can't necessarily just take it at face value, right? It looks familiar, and so you basically just hook onto it, right? um you really have to exercise discernment when you're really looking for something to listen to on the internet these days, right? It's not something where you can just sort of just take a role model and sort of just latch onto it, right? um Again, I consider the time we live to be an internet dark age, right? And especially considering how much of society has really converged onto the internet, right? It's never been more important to really filter, the information you're receiving, right? Um, and make a lot of sacrifice when it comes to, consuming material on the internet that you necessarily would not have had to do, 10 or 15 years ago, right? When, a lot of these, technologies like the smartphone, right? You know, internet on the go through data plans and stuff like that were sort of just coming up, right? And generally there wasn't even that much stuff on the internet, right, that was really trending, right? And so you wouldn't necessarily have to exercise as much discernment as you would have to these days, right? um and so this is like something that's very important, because especially when you're doing something like a profile series, for example, right? You know, when you're presenting very valuable information, right, but it just doesn't look like uh you know the Breakfast Club, for example, right? um Again, like a lot of it will just go over most people's heads, right? And so it's something where you know you have to really be very careful when it comes to um you know um taking information in, right? Especially putting information out too, right? Especially considering, how, much, societal interaction has also moved into the digital space as well, right? People were not necessarily, awarded, the luxury of having, through, societal situations, right? Um, very um, structured social circles, right? You know, it's something where you know you can't necessarily just um, be very um, flippant with how you interact with people, right? Um, you know, People have a lot of trouble, particularly and when you're not doing stuff that is um very important to keep society running, right? um they have trouble sort of branching out, right? Um, it's something where generally, because of kind of how society is structured, right, especially in the West, right? Um, Branching out is not something that's necessarily as easy, as um, finding a program in your community center, right, and then signing up, right, paying the $20 entry fee or whatever, sign up fee, and then signing up, right. You have to go through a lot of different channels, right. So people generally, find themselves very unfulfilled, right, and basically filling, you know, that void, right, through psychological proxies, right, particularly, right, um, and so again, right, this is something that's really getting into very deep material, but um, it's something where you have to necessarily um, be very discerning, right, um, especially even when the writing's on the wall, right, like you still kind of have to um, you know um, not cash in your chips, so to speak, right? Um, what I want to do is I really want to sort of champion this sort of style of production, right? Um, but the thing is that you know, when it comes to really, exercising, right, that championship, so to speak, right? Um, you know, you have to be very careful when it comes to um, sort of analyzing risk, right? You know, because I have a couple lists that I already want to already do profiles with, but I understand kind of when it comes to reach, right? Largely, my reach has been very inorganic, right? I haven't necessarily been able to promote this show, right? And my internet publishing career, right? To a worthy audience, so to speak. And so, to avoid, royally screwing up, right? Um, I have to pretty much, put the cart before the horse, right? And just, you know, put out the series either way, right? For the sake of continuity, right? There's a lot of people who are very skilled at this, particularly when it comes to doing internet publishing, right? That I follow, right? Not gonna name names, but it's something that I'm learning to really exercise, right? It's not something that you know, um, in setting up the show, and um, preparing for it, etc., was not something I was necessarily really trying to do, right? Um, but now, that I got, much better and bigger picture, right? Um, you know, and I've been able to, do a lot of, um, deleting and, adding and stuff like that to the picture, right? Now I'm able to really, reel in the pace of the show, right? And not just, you know, do a lot of hard hitting material like I've done in the past, right? For the sake of, my internet publishing career, right? And so, again, right? Um, it's not necessarily it's not necessarily a mystery, right? When it comes to reach, analytics, et cetera, right? It's all on all of these hosting platforms, right, is something I can just look into with a click of a button. And so, I understand, you know, um, that it's not necessarily, like how it was 15 years ago when you could put something out and slowly, based on, consistency, the algorithm would basically promote your work for you, right? Now it's basically just been put behind a paywall, right? And, essentially, a lot of infrastructure has basically been built so that, essentially, you know, um, it's basically like a, you know, um, technological fascism that's really been built up, right, through these algorithms on these hosting platforms, right? Where basically, all these tech giants that have really, whether it doesn't matter really sort of their purpose when it comes to, the private sector, right? Um, they've just been basically boosted by the algorithm, and so they'll continue to be boosted by the algorithm, right? Um, you know, it's a much different game, right? Than just, putting out work and then the algorithm just promoting your work for you, right? And so, now I'm gonna try to move into a more, non-linear, um, very, dispassionate, um, you know, um, presentation style, right? Until, I start to actually have that more organic, natural, free flowing, right? Traceable, detectable, um, sizable reach, right? That would generally come from, doing promotion, right? Again, right? Like all those channels are already been set up, right? And so, this is definitely more of a transitory period. And so, you know, um, and with respect to that, right, I want to do a lot more, you know, sort of, one offs, right? Than, really try to put together a series like I just did, right? Kind of offhandedly, right? With this League of Legends workflow series, right? This series is definitely going to be a lot more, you know, um, palatable, right? Because it's going to be, instructional as opposed to sort of, conversational, right? And so, it's going to be a lot easier to sort of source a lot of this stuff, etc. But again, I understand sort of, kind of, how competition works, etc. And so, I don't want to necessarily, turn on reach, right? Um, again, right? Uh, you know who you are, when I'm saying that, right? And um, yeah, sort of just burn my operation to the ground, right? So that's something I'm going to be very wary of, right? Um, and now understand this sort of kind of what's drawn a lot of people's depression, um, anxiety, etc. Right? Um, really be able to cater to people coming from that sort of lens, right? So um, I'm gonna leave it there, right, for a part of this episode. Um, and yeah, this is definitely more of a transitory period, right? Things are definitely looking up for sure, right? Um, moving in the right direction, right? It's a lot better saying that out loud than um, 10 or so episodes ago, 10 or so episodes ago, right? When it was definitely a slog for sure. And so, looking forward to, future, episodes of modern agriculture, and future, forms in which modern agriculture, takes, right? So this has been modern agriculture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you.